My father Gregory's casket was still being lowered into the wet ground of the Boston cemetery when my stepmother, Kimberly, chose that exact moment to destroy me. 65 family members stood frozen under the gray, late autumn sky. Kimberly waited until the cold, mechanical hum of the lowering device filled the silence before she stepped forward in her designer black suit, pointing a finger at me like I was evidence in a high-profile courtroom. "We let him rest," she announced, her voice cutting like glass. "But everyone needs to know the truth about Hannah. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. Have you ever had a family member wait until you were completely broken to tear you down? I would love to know who is part of our community tonight." Kimberly did not just speak the words. She delivered them with the calculated precision of an executioner. She reached into her tailored jacket and threw a thick medical folder directly onto the polished mahogany of the lowering casket. The paper slapped against the wood, a harsh, unforgiving sound that echoed through the damp cemetery air. She turned to the crowd, her eyes gleaming with a toxic triumph, and announced to our entire extended family that I lacked Gregory's biological DNA. According to the documents she had illegally procured, I was completely excluded from the family bloodline. The immediate reaction was a wave of shocked whispers rippling through the mourners. Uncle Jeffrey gasped, his fingers going slack as his heavy black umbrella dropped directly into the wet mud. Beside Kimberly stood her 26-year-old son, Logan. He did not bother to hide his smirk. He leaned in, casually adjusting his expensive tie, and loudly claimed that the $4.5 million architectural firm my father and I had built now rightfully defaulted to the real blood-tied heirs. He was too dense to realize that American corporate law does not care about DNA. It cares about shares. He foolishly believed that a biological technicality would automatically strip me of my legal ownership in the company. They were weaponizing this sacred moment, turning a funeral into a hostile corporate takeover. The weaponization of the sacred is a very specific type of psychological warfare. It relies on the assumption that you will be too paralyzed by the sanctity of the environment to fight back. Kimberly thought the cemetery, the grieving relatives, and the presence of my father's casket would act as a gag order on me. She assumed I would fold under the weight of public humiliation. She viewed love and family loyalty as a subscription service, one where she got to dictate the terms and cancel the contract the moment the primary account holder passed away. But my connection to my father was never a fragile paper contract. It was built on a foundation stronger than genetics. As I matched her venomous gaze with absolute chilling precision, she faltered for just a fraction of a second. She expected a weeping daughter mourning a lost inheritance. Instead, she found a seasoned architect evaluating a structural flaw in her opponent's design. I did not shed a single tear. I did not drop to my knees or beg for clarification. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I stepped forward, my posture rigid and my mind entirely clear. This was not a breakdown. It was a balance sheet, and I was about to audit her entire existence. The mourning period was officially suspended. The retaliation had begun. To understand the absolute audacity of Logan's claim to the firm, you have to look at the ledger of our lives. My father Gregory did not inherit a sprawling empire. He built his architectural preservation firm from nothing but a grueling work ethic and a meager $5,000 loan. While other children were playing in parks, I spent my childhood sitting on heavy wooden drafting tables, absorbing the scent of old parchment, graphite, and raw ambition. I learned the trade by watching him meticulously restore the crumbling facades of Boston's historic brownstones. By the time I was 20, I was working 80-hour weeks alongside him, sacrificing my youth to ensure the firm survived every economic downturn. We laid every brick, checked every compass, and bled for every contract. Kimberly and Logan, however, were nothing more than silent partners who specialized in liability. They systematically drained our corporate capital to fund their extravagant country club fees, luxury vacations, and designer wardrobes. I was the silent investor in their twisted version of a family, quietly footing the bill for their delusions of grandeur. Over an agonizing 8-year period, Kimberly had waged a slow, methodical war of erasure against me. It started with small, calculated moves. She slowly removed my biological mother's photographs from the corporate lobby, replacing them with abstract art that meant nothing to anyone. It was emotional abuse disguised as interior design. Every time a picture came down, it was a message telling me I did not belong. I documented every slight, every missing photograph, and every stolen dollar. I realized then that their affection was entirely transactional. They did not love my father. They loved the lifestyle his exhaustion provided. Logan, who had never so much as picked up a T-square or visited a job site, now stood in the mud, demanding the keys to a kingdom he could not even spell the name of. They operated under the delusion that they were the rightful owners of our sweat and tears. I watched Logan smirk, his smooth hands uncalloused by a single day of hard labor, and I felt nothing but a cold, surgical resolve. The pain of not belonging, which Kimberly had tried so desperately to inflict upon me for nearly a decade, had mutated into a shield of impenetrable armor. I had stopped seeking her validation years ago. When you finally cut the cord on toxic ties, the resulting freedom is intoxicating. I stood by the open grave, fully aware that the empire we built was not just a business. It was the physical manifestation of my father's soul and my absolute dedication. They wanted a war over assets, but I was fully prepared to demolish them down to the bedrock. The silence that followed my unwavering stare was too much for Kimberly's fragile ego to handle. Realizing that the public shaming had not broken my spirit, she immediately escalated the hostility. She turned sharply and signaled to the 2 private security guards she had hired for the funeral. With a wave of her manicured hand, she ordered them to physically remove me from the cemetery grounds, loudly threatening to press criminal trespassing charges if I did not vacate my own father's burial site. Before the guards could even take a full step in my direction, a powerful voice sliced through the heavy fog-laden air. "Stop exactly where you are," the voice commanded. It was Marcus, our brilliant chief legal counsel, and my father's most trusted confidant. He stepped forward from the shadows of an ancient, sprawling oak tree, looking less like a mourner and more like an executioner arriving to deliver a verdict. In his hands, he held a double-sealed manila envelope and a small, heavy-duty encrypted audio device. Marcus cut right through Kimberly's manufactured chaos with surgical precision. He announced to the frozen crowd that Gregory had not been the blind, easily manipulated old man Kimberly believed him to be. Exactly 6 months before his sudden passing, my father had discovered Kimberly illegally raiding his private medical records, searching for leverage. Kimberly's face drained of color as Marcus explained that Gregory had anticipated this exact theatrical ambush. He had left very precise, legally binding instructions for a public readout at his graveside if Kimberly ever attempted to dispute my standing. This is the tragic comedy of the illusion of entitlement. People like Kimberly and Logan convince themselves they are the rightful monarchs of a kingdom they never helped build. They mistake their proximity to power for actual authority. They believe that possessing a marriage certificate or a shared address grants them unlimited access to a lifetime of someone else's hard-earned wealth. This illusion blinds them to the reality that true creators always protect their blueprints. Kimberly thought she was playing chess, but she was merely moving stolen checkers on a board my father had designed. She had banked her entire future on a biological technicality, completely ignorant of the fact that my father had already run a full diagnostic on her loyalty and found it catastrophically lacking. The guards backed away, realizing instantly that they were taking orders from a woman who had just lost all her power. The tension in the air shifted from sorrow to a breathless, electric anticipation. Cousin Taylor pulled her children closer, sensing the impending detonation. They were not shocked by what they had done to me. They were paralyzed by the sudden realization that I had stopped playing along. Marcus stepped up to the casket, his eyes fixed coldly on Kimberly, and prepared to deliver the final strike. Marcus pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner of the encrypted audio device, unlocking it with a sharp electronic chirp. He connected it to a small, high-fidelity wireless speaker he pulled from his coat. A second later, my father's booming, unmistakable voice filled the foggy cemetery air, echoing off the ancient headstones. "My beloved family," Gregory's recorded voice began, calm but laced with absolute authority. "If you are hearing this, it means my wife could not resist her own greed." He stated clearly, without a shred of hesitation, that he had known about my biological status for exactly 31 years. He recounted how he had chosen me, loved me completely, and legally filed an ironclad formal acknowledgement of paternity at the county courthouse 3 decades ago. I was his daughter in every way that the law and the universe recognized. The crowd audibly gasped, but Gregory's voice was not finished. It grew colder, sharper, taking on the tone of a chief executive officer liquidating a toxic asset. Kimberly, my father's voice rang out, since you are so profoundly concerned with genetics and bloodlines, let us discuss the private DNA tests I secretly conducted on this family 6 months ago. The color completely vanished from Kimberly's face. She stumbled backward, her heel sinking deep into the wet grass. The ultimate kill shot dropped from the speaker. Gregory revealed, with forensic clinicality, that the tests proved Logan was actually the one with zero biological relation to him. Logan was not Gregory's son. He was the byproduct of Kimberly's sordid affair with an old corporate partner, an affair that took place before her marriage to my father was even signed. Kimberly had built her entire throne on a mountain of biological lies, projecting her own counterfeit nature onto me. She was the true fraud, the Trojan horse that had smuggled her own illegitimacy into our home. It was a masterclass in projection. She accused me of the exact crime she had committed, hoping to eliminate the true heir before her own deception was brought to light. The devastation was absolute. There was no room for denial, no loophole for her to crawl through. My father had weaponized her own strategy against her, using her obsession with DNA to architect her complete and total ruin. Logan's arrogant posture collapsed instantly. He looked at his mother, panic contorting his previously smug features. The firm he had mentally spent the profits of, the status he had flaunted, and the identity he had weaponized against me were all instantly vaporized. I stood perfectly still, watching the destruction of their false reality. Anger was replaced by an overwhelming sense of profound vindication. The truth was out, naked and indisputable, washing away 8 years of gaslighting in less than 3 minutes. The genetic card had been completely and violently flipped. Logan's smug, unearned satisfaction vanished into thin air. His hands began to shake so uncontrollably that his luxury smartphone slipped from his grip, falling heavily into the fresh, wet mud beside the casket. He did not even bend down to retrieve it. Marcus, maintaining his stoic, professional demeanor, smoothly transitioned from the audio recording to the thick manila envelope. He pulled out the final, heavily notarized legal blueprint of my father's estate. In a clear, commanding voice, Marcus read the strict, unbreakable parameters of the will. The entire $4.5 million architectural empire, including all subsidiary assets, patents, and real estate holdings, was permanently locked into an ironclad trust. This trust was to be solely and exclusively controlled by me, Hannah. There were no joint committees, no board seats for the widow, and no allowances for the stepson. As for Kimberly, Marcus continued, flipping to a yellow document from decades past, she was bound by a forgotten, aggressively restrictive prenuptial agreement. My father had dynamic fail-safes embedded within it. The moment she legally corporate certified Logan as Gregory's biological heir to secure trust funds during the marriage, she committed active financial fraud, which completely voided the prenup and stripped her of all protections. This specific clause effectively blocked her corporate access, voiding any claim to the firm, the properties, and the primary accounts in the event of documented deceit. She was left with nothing but her designer suit and a catastrophic public scandal. The social execution was swift and silent. The 65 family members who had been quietly observing this spectacular implosion made their ruling, without a single word spoken. Aunts, uncles, and cousins began to physically step away from Kimberly and Logan. The crowd parted like the sea, leaving the two of them completely isolated on an island of their own making. Uncle Jeffrey, Cousin Taylor, and Aunt Melissa walked deliberately across the damp grass to stand protectively behind me. Their isolation was palpable, a physical manifestation of their moral bankruptcy. For years, they had maneuvered through our family gatherings with an air of untouchable superiority, believing their deception was flawlessly executed. Now, they were outcasts, stripped of the very name and resources they had exploited. The silence in the cemetery was no longer mournful. It was the sound of a toxic foundation cracking and giving way under the weight of the truth. I was the heir, the architect, and the survivor. The power reversal was absolute and undeniable. I did not smile, and I did not gloat. I simply looked at the two shivering, muddy figures standing alone by the open grave and felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of a balanced ledger. 72 hours later, reality finally crashed down on the counterfeit royals. Kimberly and Logan showed up at the massive oak doors of our corporate studio, completely broken and stripped of their former arrogance. They bypassed the receptionist and pleaded to see me. I allowed them into my father's, now my corner office, if only to finalize the transaction. They stood before my glass desk, shaking, begging me to release emergency corporate funds to save their sprawling personal estate from imminent foreclosure. Logan could not even look me in the eye. Kimberly's voice cracked as she tried to invoke the memory of the man she had betrayed. I sat perfectly still, listening to the hollow echo of their desperation. This is the unbending law of the seed planter. Justice does not favor those who merely show up for the harvest. It belongs to those who painstakingly plant the seeds, water the soil with their sweat, and weather the storms to protect the crop. For years, I had built this firm brick by brick, enduring her emotional abuse and his lazy entitlement. They had contributed nothing but weeds to our garden, yet they expected a lifetime supply of the fruit. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out the formal corporate notice executing the emergency clauses of her prenuptial agreement, and calmly slid it across the cold glass surface. The forensic proof of her infidelity had already triggered an automatic freeze on all their connected bank accounts. The paper stopped right at Kimberly's fingertips. I told them this was the end of the line, said a quiet, permanent goodbye, and had security escort them out. I walked out of my office and watched as the heavy oak doors closed on them permanently, sealing them out of my life forever. Taking full leadership of the firm, my first official act was to establish the Gregory Heritage Foundation, a robust endowment designed to fund full-ride architecture scholarships for cast-out, unhoused students who needed a foundation to build their own lives upon. Later that evening, I stood alone on the restored brick terrace of our historic headquarters, the skyline of Boston glowing beneath me. In my hand, I held my father's heavy, antique copper compass. The cold metal grounded me. I have come to realize that some battles are not fought to destroy your enemies, but to reclaim the territory of your own soul. Forgiveness is not always about letting the other person off the hook or welcoming them back into your life. Sometimes it is simply the heavy, necessary work of setting yourself free. The anger is gone now, replaced by the quiet, beautiful rhythm of drafting a new future. If this blueprint for justice moved your soul, hit that share button right now. Subscribe to become a true part of our architectural family, and type the word "unbroken" in the comment section below to let me know you are standing strong with us until the very end. Let's build a beautiful future together.